Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive here with my Mind MashUps. We're so glad you could join us today for this one.
It's a topic I think a lot of people are really going to find fascinating.
Yeah, I think so, too.
I mean, it's one that kind of invites us to consider the connections between, seemingly very different aspects of our reality.
Absolutely. In this deep dive, you and I are going to be looking closely at the science behind Earth's weakening magnetic field and the spiritual concept of what's often called the thinning veil.
Yeah.
We've gathered some really compelling research and insights, and our mission together today is to unpack what's currently understood about our planet's protective shield, what various spiritual traditions propose about this veil between worlds,
Right.
and to explore whether these two seemingly disparate ideas might actually be connected in some way.
Yeah, it's a journey as you consider it, into some of the unseen forces that shape our experience, both in the physical world and perhaps in realms beyond our everyday perception.
Get ready for some surprising facts and definitely some thought-provoking possibilities.
Absolutely.
So let's start by unpacking the first part of our discussion, Earth's magnetic field. Now, for those of you who might not be deeply familiar with this, could you give us a clear rundown of what it is and why it holds such importance for us?
Certainly, Earth's magnetic field, which you might also hear referred to as the geomagnetic field, is essentially an invisible force field that surrounds our entire planet.
Right?
As you delve into the science, you'll find that it's primarily generated by the movement of molten iron and nickel within Earth's outer core. This dynamic and continuous process is what scientists call the geodynamo.
So if you imagine it, it's like a colossal natural dynamo constantly spinning way beneath our feet,
Precisely.
down there in the Earth's core.
And this magnetic field doesn't just stay within the Earth.
Right.
It extends far out into space, forming this vast region that we know as the magnetosphere. This
Right.
magnetosphere is absolutely crucial for you and for all life on Earth because it acts as a very effective shield, deflecting a significant amount of harmful solar radiation, as well as energetic particles coming from cosmic rays.
Right, so it's protecting us.
Without this protection, as you might imagine, our atmosphere could be gradually stripped away,
Yeah.
and the conditions necessary for life as we know it simply wouldn't be possible.
That really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
But you hear reports and see research indicating that this field is actually weakening.
That's right.
What's the current understanding of what's happening there?
As you examine the recent data, you'll find that observations do indeed indicate that the magnetic field has been losing some of its overall strength.
Good.
On a global average, the current estimate is that it has weakened by approximately 9% over the last couple of centuries.
9%.
Yeah,
That certainly sounds significant when you think about it.
it is.
Is this weakening something that's happening uniformly across the entire globe?
Not entirely. As you look closer at the data, you'll notice that there's a particularly interesting area of reduced magnetic intensity.
Okay.
Located between the continents of Africa and South America, this region is known as the South Atlantic Anomaly, or often just the SAA.
The South Atlantic Anomaly,
Yeah,
it has a somewhat ominous ring to it, doesn't it?
it does.
What makes this particular region so noteworthy?
What's particularly fascinating for you to understand is that within the SAA, Earth's inner Van Allen radiation belt actually comes closest to the planet's surface.
Oh, wow.
This proximity results in a higher concentration, a higher flux of energetic particles in that specific region.
Okay.
Consequently, any satellites that are orbiting Earth, including something as significant as the International Space Station, are exposed to noticeably higher levels of ionizing radiation whenever their orbit takes them through the South Atlantic Anomaly.
So if you're thinking about our technology that operates in space, it's particularly vulnerable when it passes through that area.
Yeah, exactly. And what makes it even more relevant for you to follow is that the anomaly itself has been observed to be expanding in size and also continuing to decrease in its magnetic intensity.
Wow, so it's getting weaker and bigger.
This naturally raises important questions among researchers about the long-term stability of our planet's magnetic shield in that particular region.
That is a little concerning when you consider our increasing reliance on space-based technology.
It is something to keep an eye on.
Are there any other changes happening with the magnetic field that we should be aware of?
Yes, there is another quite notable phenomenon, and that's the shifting of the magnetic poles.
Okay.
The magnetic North Pole, for instance, has been moving quite rapidly towards Russia in recent years. And what's significant is that the rate of this movement is unprecedented in recent history.
Wow.
This movement, as you might imagine, has implications for various navigation systems that rely on the Earth's magnetic field for their operation.
So the compass that might be on your phone, for example,
Right.
might not be pointing exactly where you intuitively expect it to in the years to come.
It's a bit more complex than that for everyday consumer use, as most modern navigation systems utilize multiple data points beyond just magnetic north.
Okay.
However, for specialized systems that rely more heavily on the magnetic field for orientation, adjustments are indeed becoming necessary.
I see.
Furthermore, these ongoing changes naturally lead to more in-depth scientific discussions about the potential for a geomagnetic reversal
Okay.
to occur at some point in the future.
A pole reversal.
Yes.
That sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie. Is this something that has actually happened in Earth's geological past?
It has indeed.
Yeah.
As you look at the long history of our planet, you'll find evidence that the Earth's magnetic poles have flipped, reversed their polarity many times throughout its existence.
What?
However, the crucial point for you to understand is that the timing of the next such reversal is still a significant subject of ongoing debate and research among scientists. We don't currently have a precise date or even a completely clear understanding of all the factors that might trigger such an event.
Okay, so to recap the science, then you have a magnetic field that is weakening overall.
Yes.
A specific area that's particularly weak and expanding.
Correct.
A magnetic pole that's on the move at a rapid pace. And the historical precedent of the poles potentially flipping again in the future.
Right.
That paints a pretty fascinating scientific picture.
It does.
Now let's turn our attention to the other side of our discussion today. The spiritual perspective of the thinning veil.
Okay.
What exactly is this concept as it's understood in various traditions?
The veil, in many diverse spiritual traditions that you might encounter, functions as a metaphorical boundary.
Yeah.
It represents what is perceived as a separation between the physical world, the reality that we experience directly through our senses,
Right.
and the spiritual or metaphysical realms.
Okay.
This other realm is often envisioned as the domain of spirits' ancestors and perhaps deeper, more fundamental truths about existence.
So if you were to visualize it, it's akin to a curtain or a membrane existing between two different realities.
That's a very helpful analogy for you to keep in mind. This veil is generally considered to be in place, acting as a sort of filter that limits our direct conscious interaction with the spiritual realm.
Right.
However, the concept of a thinning veil proposes that at certain specific times or under particular circumstances, this boundary can become more permeable, more easily crossed in one or both directions.
I see. And what are the believed consequences or experiences associated with this thinning of the veil? What might you expect if such a thing were to occur?
When the veil is believed to be thin,
Right.
it's often thought to facilitate enhanced communication with those who reside in the spirit world, such as departed ancestors.
Okay.
Individuals might report experiencing heightened intuition, a stronger and more profound sense of interconnectedness with the universe around them, and perhaps even fleeting glimpses or intuitive feelings of other realities that are not typically accessible to our everyday senses.
Wow. That's pretty profound.
It is.
Are there particular times of the year or specific events that are traditionally associated with this thinning of the veil in spiritual practices?
Yes, there are indeed, for example, in numerous cultures, particularly those with Celtic or pagan origins, the times surrounding Samhain, which, as you know, is often observed in contemporary culture as Halloween,
Right.
is traditionally considered a period when the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead is at its thinnest. This is seen as a time when interaction between spirits and the physical world is more likely or more easily facilitated.
That certainly aligns with a lot of the folklore and traditions that you see around that particular time of year.
It does.
Are there also specific geographical locations that are believed to be associated with a thinner veil?
Absolutely. The concept of thin places is quite prevalent in various spiritual and cultural contexts. These are specific locations often characterized by exceptional natural beauty or significant historical importance, where the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms is intuitively felt to be particularly permeable.
Okay.
People who visit these so-called thin places may describe experiencing a profound sense of peace, a feeling of transcendence beyond the ordinary,
Right.
or a deep sense of connection to something much larger and more profound than themselves.
I think many people can relate to having visited a place in nature and feeling a sense of something special or different there.
I think that's a very common experience.
Yeah. And is there a general belief within spiritual traditions about what might actually cause this veil to thin?
Several interesting ideas exist across different belief systems.
Hmm.
Some spiritual practitioners believe that the veil naturally tends to thin as more individuals on Earth undergo a process of spiritual awakening,
Okay.
leading to a rise in the overall collective consciousness of humanity.
So that's an interesting idea that we could collectively be affecting this.
The underlying idea here is that a greater collective awareness of spiritual realities can, in a sense, make those realities more accessible to more people.
Right. It's almost like we're tuning into a different frequency.
That's a good way to think about it.
It's fascinating how these similar concepts seem to emerge independently across such diverse cultures and throughout history.
Yeah.
Does this fundamental idea of a veil or a boundary between worlds appear in a wide range of different belief systems?
Yes, it does. While the specific interpretations of what lies beyond the veil,
Uh-huh.
the nature of the beings or realms that exist there, and the precise mechanisms by which the veil might thin can certainly vary.
Right.
The core concept of a boundary existing between the physical world that we inhabit and a more fundamental spiritual or metaphysical dimension is a recurring theme that you'll find in a remarkably diverse array of cultures and spiritual traditions around the globe.
Okay, so now you have this picture.
Mm-hmm.
On the scientific side, a dynamic Earth with a weakening magnetic field.
Yes.
And on the spiritual side, this concept of a thinning veil between worlds.
Right.
This is the point where things get really intriguing.
Yeah.
Could these two seemingly separate phenomena actually be connected in some meaningful way?
That is indeed the central and very compelling question that we're exploring today, isn't it?
Right.
And while it's crucial for you to understand that this remains an area of active speculation and ongoing exploration, a bridge between established science and less empirically defined spiritual concepts,
Wow.
there are some genuinely intriguing theories and lines of thought that propose a potential link.
I'm eager to hear them.
Mhm.
What are some of the primary theories that attempt to connect these two seemingly different aspects of reality?
One prominent line of thought that you might find interesting suggests that the Earth's magnetic field might actually play a more significant role in influencing human consciousness and our general perception of reality than we currently fully understand.
Okay.
If the strength of this field were to weaken, as the scientific data indicates,
Right.
it could potentially lead to subtle but significant alterations in our brainwave patterns, or even in what some describe as our bioenergetic fields. Okay.
These alterations, in turn, might make us more receptive to experiences that we tend to categorize as spiritual, intuitive, or even extrasensory.
So in a metaphorical sense, a weaker magnetic field might be turning up the sensitivity dial on our spiritual antenna,
Yeah.
making us more attuned to subtle energies or experiences.
That's a very insightful and accessible way for you to think about it.
Okay.
It captures the underlying essence of this particular theory.
Yeah.
Another interesting point for you to consider is the established connection between certain physical environments, places like powerful waterfalls or active volcanoes, and the common human perception of experiencing a thin veil in those locations.
Yeah.
These are environments where you have a convergence of different energetic or ecological systems interacting in dynamic ways.
And the thought here is that these intense physical interactions might somehow create conditions where the boundary between the physical and other realms becomes more porous or more easily perceived. Precisely this line of reasoning suggests to you that changes in our planet's fundamental physical environment, such as the ongoing weakening of its global magnetic field, could indeed have corresponding metaphysical implications,
Okay.
potentially enhancing our collective or individual connection to the spiritual realm in ways that we are only beginning to explore and understand.
Certainly feels like we're on the very edge of some profound and fundamental questions about reality here.
It's a very interesting area of inquiry.
Now let's delve a little deeper into the historical context.
Okay.
Have there been significant past changes in Earth's magnetic field throughout geological history? And are there any suggestive links to notable spiritual or cultural shifts that might have occurred during those periods?
This is where the intersection of these ideas becomes particularly compelling for you to examine.
Okay.
Let's consider as an example what's known as the MashUps excursion, a relatively brief but significant event that occurred approximately 41,000 to 42,000 years ago. During this period, the Earth's magnetic field strength experienced a dramatic decline, plummeting to levels as low as about 6% of its modern intensity.
Wow, that's an extraordinarily significant drop in strength.
It was a major event.
What were some of the major environmental consequences that occurred as a result of such a weakened field?
The diminished field strength, as you can imagine, led to a considerable thinning of the Earth's protective ozone layer.
Uh-huh.
This resulted in significant spikes in the amount of harmful ultraviolet UV radiation reaching the Earth's surface.
Okay.
Interestingly, during this time, auroras, which are typically seen only at very high latitudes near the poles, would have been visible much closer to the equator.
Wow.
Geological evidence also suggests that there was an expansion of ice sheets in North America and a period of increased aridification or drying
Uh,
in regions like Australia during the same time frame.
and were there any particularly noticeable biological or cultural shifts occurring in the world around that same time?
Intriguingly, the period of the Lachaume's excursion appears to coincide with several quite significant events in the history of life on Earth and the development of human culture.
Okay.
There's paleontological evidence indicating extinctions of over 30 different species of megafauna,
Wow.
including giant kangaroos and other large mammals.
Uh-huh.
This period also aligns with a noticeable decline in Neanderthal populations and a corresponding apparent increase in the use of caves as habitation sites by early Homo sapiens.
Okay.
Perhaps most relevant to our discussion today is the clear emergence of symbolic cave art during this same period.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Some researchers have speculated that this flourishing of artistic expression might be linked to a heightened environmental sensitivity,
Yeah.
or even a shift in the spiritual or perceptual awareness of early humans potentially as a response to the dramatic and challenging environmental changes they were experiencing due to the weakened magnetic field and increased radiation.
That's a really compelling connection. It certainly makes you wonder if these large-scale planetary environmental shifts could have had a profound impact on human consciousness, or their fundamental ways of understanding and interacting with the world around them.
It's an intriguing hypothesis.
Now, you mentioned earlier that some theories propose our own brains might possess a sensitivity to the Earth's magnetic field.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that aspect for us?
Certainly, scientific research has indeed shown that humans, much like a wide variety of other animal species, possess microscopic crystals of magnetite within their brains.
Okay.
These tiny magnetic particles could potentially act as biological sensors, allowing us to detect and perhaps even subconsciously respond to variations in the Earth's ambient magnetic field.
So we might actually have a built-in magnetic sense.
That's the theory.
If the overall strength of this field weakens, as we've been discussing, it's plausible that this could affect the sensitivity of these neural structures and perhaps even influence our intuitive abilities or our general sense of orientation.
That's a possibility that is certainly worth exploring.
So it's almost as if our internal compasses at a neurological level might be experiencing some degree of fluctuation,
Right.
potentially opening us up to different kinds of sensory or perceptual information.
That's one way to think about it.
Furthermore, research in the field of heart-brain coherence has revealed a fascinating connection. Our heart rate variability, which is the naturally occurring pattern of intervals between our individual heartbeats,
Right.
can actually synchronize with the Earth's magnetic rhythms, particularly during periods of geomagnetic disturbances.
It's an incredible connection when you think about it.
That's quite remarkable when you think about it. Our very physiology seems to be in some way attuned to the planet's magnetic field.
Precisely, and with a reduced overall magnetic shield.
Yeah.
As we discussed earlier, the Earth's surface and its inhabitants are exposed to increased levels of various cosmic energies. Some researchers in this interdisciplinary field have theorized that this increased exposure could be linked to alterations in our heart rate variability and potentially even to the types of subjective experiences that are often described as being spiritual, transcendent, or outside the realm of ordinary perception.
That's fascinating.
It is.
And what about the pineal gland? You often hear it referred to
Well-
as the third eye in various spiritual and philosophical contexts.
Right.
Could it also be playing a role in our potential sensitivity to these magnetic field changes?
That's a truly fascinating area of ongoing research and speculation. The pineal gland, a small endocrine gland located in the brain, has indeed been suggested by some researchers and spiritual traditions to potentially function as a kind of geomagnetic sensor.
Why?
The underlying idea is that a weaker or more fluctuating external magnetic field might reduce a certain type of interference with the pineal gland's natural activity, potentially enhancing our perception of non-physical realms or more subtle forms of energy.
So it's almost like turning down the static on a radio signal, allowing us to potentially pick up fainter broadcasts that we wouldn't normally be able to hear.
That's another very insightful analogy for you to consider
Okay.
as you try to grasp these complex potential connections.
Now let's shift our focus to something a bit more dynamic and observable.
Right.
Geomagnetic storms.
Okay.
How do these events, which are disturbances in the Earth's magnetosphere caused by solar activity, typically impact human consciousness and physiology?
Geomagnetic storms, which arise from fluctuations in the solar wind and disturbances in Earth's magnetosphere, can have a diverse range of effects on human physiology and psychology,
Okay.
as you might find in the scientific literature.
Hmm.
Studies utilizing electroencephalography, or EEG, to measure brainwave activity have indicated that severe geomagnetic storms can disrupt our normal patterns of brainwave activity.
Okay.
Researchers often observe an increase in the power of theta and alpha brainwaves, which are typically associated with states of reduced focused attention, and a potential disruption in the efficient communication between different regions of the brain.
So it's almost as if our normal mental processing gets a bit scrambled or less coherent during these periods of intense solar activity.
In some ways, that's a reasonable way for you to understand the potential effects.
Okay.
There's also evidence from some studies suggesting increased activity in the right hemisphere of the brain during these storms,
Okay.
which has been linked in some research to negative emotional states and a temporary decrease in more analytical or logical processing.
I see.
Additionally, these geomagnetic events can affect the hypothalamus, a critical region in the brain responsible for regulating hormones and our circadian rhythms, potentially leading to physiological imbalances.
Wow. That's a lot to think about.
It is.
That could certainly explain why some individuals report feeling generally out of sorts or experiencing changes in their sleep patterns during periods of heightened solar activity.
It's a common experience.
Are there any paradoxical or less intuitive effects that have been observed?
Interestingly, some research has indicated that while strong geomagnetic storms can, in some individuals, lower the threshold for experiencing seizures,
Uh-huh.
for example, in individuals with epilepsy,
Right.
there's also some evidence suggesting they might paradoxically reduce the overall frequency of seizures
Yeah.
during periods of extreme sustained solar activity.
That's interesting.
Furthermore, studies have suggested that weaker or moderate geomagnetic storms might actually enhance the functional connectivity within the brain's cortex, while more severe storms tend to have the opposite effect, inhibiting this interconnectedness.
So it sounds like the intensity and nature of the geomagnetic disturbance play a really significant role in determining its effects.
That seems to be the case.
What about the more direct psychological impacts that researchers have explored?
Research has indeed linked geomagnetic storms to a variety of psychological effects that you might find documented.
Okay.
For instance, some studies have observed a statistically significant increase in hospital admissions for cases of depression in men following severe geomagnetic storms. And a heightened sense of anxiety has been reported more frequently by women during these periods.
Yeah.
Reduced heart rate variability, which, as we discussed, reflects our autonomic nervous system's flexibility,
Uh-huh.
has also been correlated with impaired decision-making abilities and a decreased capacity to effectively cope with stress during times of geomagnetic disturbance.
Right.
Sleep disruption is another commonly reported issue, potentially linked to the observed surges in theta brainwave activity
Okay.
that can interfere with the restorative rapid eye movement, REM, sleep cycles.
It seems like there might be some interesting gender-specific responses to these geomagnetic events as well.
That's a key observation that you'll find in some of the research.
Okay.
Studies have suggested that males might be more susceptible to experiencing manic or depressive episodes in the aftermath of geomagnetic storms,
Wow.
with hospitalizations for these conditions sometimes peaking a week or two after the disturbance.
So there's like a delayed reaction?
It seems
Females, on the other hand, have tended to show more pronounced anomalies in right hemisphere EEG activity during storms, which, as mentioned earlier, have been associated with increased emotional volatility and the reporting of physical symptoms like headaches.
right.
And what are some of the potential physiological mechanisms that might underlie these effects?
Right.
How might a disturbance in the Earth's magnetic field actually trigger these changes in our bodies and minds?
Several theories are currently being explored by researchers in this interdisciplinary field.
Uh-huh.
One prominent idea involves the magnetite crystals present in our brains.
Okay.
Fluctuations and rapid changes in the Earth's magnetic field during a storm could potentially interfere with the delicate neural signals that these crystals are believed to help transmit.
All right.
Another possibility relates to the pineal gland's known sensitivity to electromagnetic fields, which could in turn affect its production of melatonin, a hormone that plays a crucial role in regulating our sleep-wake cycles and influencing mood. Finally, geomagnetic storms can exert stress on our autonomic nervous system, potentially leading to a reduction in parasympathetic activity, the rest and digest response,
Okay.
and a corresponding increase in the sympathetic fight or flight response, contributing to feelings of anxiety and physiological arousal.
So it's like our bodies are going into a state of stress.
No way, yes.
And you mentioned earlier that some individuals with spiritual practices report experiencing heightened intuition during solar storms.
Yes.
Does that anecdotal evidence align with any of the scientific findings, or is it a completely separate phenomenon?
It's a very interesting juxtaposition that you've highlighted. While the bulk of the scientific data, as we've discussed, points towards potential neurological disruptions and increased emotional volatility during strong geomagnetic storms,
Right.
there are indeed anecdotal reports from some individuals within various spiritual communities who claim to experience the opposite, a heightened sense of awareness, increased intuitive insights,
Right.
or a feeling of being more connected to subtle energies during these same periods.
So it's almost like two sides of the same coin.
This discrepancy could potentially be attributed to a number of factors, including individual differences in sensitivity to these energetic shifts, the way in which individuals interpret their internal experiences,
Uh-huh.
or perhaps even the specific types and intensities of geomagnetic activity involved. It certainly remains an area where further rigorous research and open-minded exploration are definitely needed to bridge these different perspectives.
Absolutely. So considering all of this that we've explored today, the weakening magnetic field, the potential connection to the concept of a thinning veil, and the documented impacts of geomagnetic storms on our biology and psychology, what are some of the practical implications for us as individuals, and how might we personally reflect on all this information?
On a very personal level, this could be interpreted as a time of potentially heightened spiritual awareness and perhaps even a period of collective transformation. Whether these shifts are primarily driven by natural planetary cycles, subtle changes in the collective consciousness of humanity, or indeed by the ongoing alterations in Earth's magnetic field, it's plausible that many of us might be becoming more attuned to our own intuition,
Uh-huh.
noticing an increase in synchronicities or meaningful coincidences in our lives, and developing a deeper, more profound understanding of our place within the larger cosmic picture.
So it's almost as if you're suggesting this could be an opportune time to really look inward and pay closer attention to those subtle intuitive nudges and the seemingly random coincidences that occur in our lives.
Precisely, it could be a particularly valuable time for you to intentionally explore your own inner landscape
Huh.
through practices like mindfulness meditation and quiet reflection.
Okay.
It might also be a time when consciously seeking to connect with what you personally perceive as your higher self or the subtle energies around you could be particularly rewarding.
Ah.
Embracing this period of change, regardless of its ultimate underlying cause, could potentially lead to significant personal growth, a greater sense of interconnectedness with the world, and a richer understanding of your own inner workings.
But it also sounds like these kinds of energetic shifts could potentially feel a bit overwhelming or destabilizing for some individuals.
Right.
What are some practical ways to stay grounded and maintain a sense of balance during these times of potential change?
That's a crucial point for you to consider. It's important to balance any potential increase in energetic sensitivity with practices that actively help you to stay grounded and centered in your physical reality.
Right.
These could include spending quality time in nature, engaging in regular physical activity that connects you with your body, and utilizing mindfulness and grounding techniques that promote a sense of inner peace, stability, and mental clarity.
Are there any specific actions or practices that people who feel particularly sensitive to these types of planetary or energetic shifts might consider incorporating into their lives?
Some individuals who are particularly attuned to these energies might find it beneficial to keep track of publicly available geomagnetic indices during their personal meditation or spiritual practices,
Okay.
to see if they notice any correlations between the level of geomagnetic activity and their own internal experiences.
Yeah.
You might also find it insightful to keep a journal to document any synchronicities or unusual experiences that occur, especially during periods of heightened geomagnetic activity.
Okay.
And for those who identify as as being energetically sensitive, incorporating grounding techniques such as earthing, direct contact with the Earth's surface, or working with grounding crystals might be helpful tools for maintaining energetic balance.
This has truly been an incredibly deep and thought-provoking exploration into a fascinating intersection of scientific understanding and spiritual concepts.
It has been a rich discussion.
As you reflect on our conversation, what's one key takeaway that you would really want our listeners to consider as they continue to think about these ideas?
What's profoundly interesting for you to contemplate is the potential for a deeper, more holistic understanding of reality that emerges when we allow ourselves to consider both the scientific and the spiritual perspectives. The observable weakening of the Earth's magnetic field and the ancient concept of a thinning veil.
Right.
While approached through vastly different methodologies and belief systems, both seem to suggest a fundamental shift in the boundaries of our everyday human experience.
Right.
This naturally raises a profound question for you. If there is indeed some kind of connection between these two seemingly disparate phenomena,
Yeah.
what deeper implications might that hold for our understanding of consciousness, our individual and collective place within the vast universe, and ultimately the very nature of reality as we perceive it?
Yeah.
It's a multifaceted mystery that continues to unfold, inviting our ongoing curiosity, open-minded exploration, and perhaps a greater appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things.
Absolutely. We truly hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some valuable food for thought about the fascinating interplay between our planet's dynamic magnetic field and the intriguing concept of the thinning veil as you continue your day. Take a moment to consider what stood out to you most from this exploration.
Right.
Think about how these scientific and spiritual perspectives might resonate with your own personal experiences.
Right.
Have you ever noticed any changes in your intuition or your sense of connection to something larger, particularly during times of significant environmental or celestial events?
This also raises an important question for you to continue pondering. If there is indeed a meaningful connection between these physical and metaphysical shifts, what does that ultimately mean for your understanding of reality and your unique place within it all?
Don't forget, if you enjoyed this deep dive and want to hear more explorations into other intriguing topics, please take a moment to share this discussion with others who might find it interesting, and subscribe to My Mind Mashups wherever you get your audio. You can find us on all your favorite platforms, including Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook Pocket Casts, Spotify, and YouTube.
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning.
Until our next deep dive together,
Right.
keep that curiosity alive and stay open to the many wonders that continue to unfold around you every day.